Hey everyone, welcome to our conversation on sex education and the law. My name is Patricia Noel and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Digital Wellbeing here at Pure Health Exchange. Y'all, I'm so excited to have y'all here with our amazing panelists as we're going to be diving into a great conversation and learning more about sex education and HIV education mandates across the US. Before we start, we're going to go over some quick Zoom housekeeping. So as we go through tonight's event together, we want you to be mindful of your mics as to not disrupt the program. We encourage you to turn on your cameras, and you might have heard the voice tell you that we are recording this, so if you feel more comfortable with your cameras off, that is okay. Along with keeping cameras on or off, we want you to use reaction buttons and the chat box to engage with others. There'll also be opportunities to ask questions anonymously through our Google form throughout the entire program. At the end, y'all will have a chance to ask any of your outstanding questions to our amazing panelists. And you'll do that through the Google form as well. And last but not least, as I mentioned, the voice that told you it's recording, we are recording this and it will be shared on our social media platforms. Before we get started, just a quick disclaimer. This is strictly for educational purposes only. The points and views and opinions of those expressed by those on our panel is just their own points of views. We want to make sure that while we have some legal professionals on here, that they're just sharing it to provide this information. And it's not at all professional advice. So y'all, let's do a quick temp check to see how familiar you are with PHE. Using your emojis, let's drop a thumbs up if you are our biggest fan. You're an expert and you can just recite our mission verbatim. You can go ahead and drop the okay emoji if you're new to PHE and you're looking to learn more about all the incredible work that we do with young people. And lastly, y'all, go ahead and drop that fire emoji if you're ready to get lit with us and learn all of the amazing information that we have for y'all tonight. Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. I'm seeing some fire. Y'all ready? Some okays, new and excited to learn more. I love the energy, y'all. Love the energy. Okay, so now we're going to transition to sharing more about what we do here at Pure Health Exchange. Our mission is to build healthier communities with young people. Together, we create education opportunities for peers to share the tools and resources young people need to make healthy decisions. Pure Health Exchange provides a skills-based health education curriculum to young people across the US. We partner with high schools where near peer facilitators and now peer facilitators in Boston and Chicago get to facilitate health conversations within their own communities to young people under 18. Most importantly, y'all, we meet young people where they are. Over the last 2 years, PHE developed and co-designed with young people a website and a mobile app called Self-See. Self-See is a place where young people can see themselves reflected within a supportive and inclusive community that prioritizes their identity, truth, and experiences about mental health, sexual health, and beyond. I do see some of our volunteers who are mentors on Self-See in the attendance as well. Thanks for being here, and thank you for all your work with our young people. Our vision is that together with our partners, we'll advance health equity and improve health outcomes for young people in under-resourced communities. Now, when we say partners, that includes young people. We know that young people know what's best for them and their health. And although young people are struggling with their health, they are resilient and they want to be leaders in building healthier communities for themselves and their community. And we learn that every day that we work with them. Through PHE, all young people can get the support they need whenever and whenever they want. So as you registered for tonight's event, you might have saw that we are looking to make sure that we reach as many young people as possible. And this is a fundraising opportunity. Our fundraising goal for this event is $500. And I just want to take a moment now to express thank yous to anyone who's made a contribution already. I also want to take this time to thank you, all of our staff who are in attendance who make sure that we're able to do this work and meet young people every day. By making a donation today, you can support our mission and provide more young people with access to health equity. So please consider making a donation by texting PHE to the phone number displayed on the screen, or you can use the QR code pointing your camera directly to the little code right there, and it'll pop up. All right, y'all, a little drum roll, please. Now the moment we've all been waiting for. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce y'all to our amazing panelists. So today we have 3 incredible people. I'm going to use all the different adjectives to just showcase how amazing they are, who are going to be talking to us about sex and health and HIV education mandates and how we can continue to be stronger supporters by, with, and for all young people. So please help me give a warm welcome, Zoom applause to our panelists, Josette, Maverick, and Maddie. Okay, first off, we got Josette Belmont, who uses they, them pronouns. Josette is a sex education advocate, scholar, and staff member at PHE. They received an MA in Women's and Gender Studies from the Graduate Center, CUNY, While there, they completed a thesis which examined sex education policies and curriculum for New York State and pushed for curriculum which centers LGBTQIA plus young people. Also want to shout out Josette works here at PHE, and we're so lucky to have them as part of our staff. Next, we have Maverick James, who uses he, him pronouns, and he is a data privacy and security attorney at the Beckage firm, a woman and veteran-owned law firm. Maverick represents organizations of all sizes and across all industry sectors through the response to and investigation of data privacy and security incidents. Prior to his career, Maverick served as a health facilitator in the high schools of New York City through PHE. Today, he serves as a PHE National Board member, paving the way for others to learn more about building healthier communities for more young people. Hey, Maverick. And last, we have Maddie, our last panelist. Maddie Holler, who uses she, her pronouns, is a healthcare law. Wow, the words, y'all, my bad. I'm gonna start that over again so I can get the breadth of how amazing they are. So Maddie, who uses she, her pronouns, is a healthcare lawyer in Seattle, Washington. Maddie's clients are healthcare organizations of all types, and she regularly advises them on issues that include health information, access and technology, patient rights, and the provision of services to young people. Like Maverick, Maddie is also a PHE alum and currently serves on the alumni committee promoting community giving through fundraising events. Huge shout out and thank you to Josette, Maverick, and Maddie for lending their expertise for our program today. Please go ahead and show them some love in the chat or with your reaction buttons. I hope y'all are seeing the love in the chat, y'all. So amazing that some of our health facilitators can come back and be in this space with us. Okay, so now before we jump into the great conversation, we're gonna play a game of Kahoot, and that's gonna test everyone's knowledge on self-education mandates across the US. It's being launched right now on the screen, and it's okay, y'all. You will be learning this information together, so don't worry if you don't get the answer. The link was just dropped in the chat. You can also just use the information that's on the screen right here, going to www.kahoot.it, and then you'll enter the game pin. You can also use your phone if you're using your phone and scan the QR code on the screen. While playing, each person will have 10 seconds to submit their response. And for each question you get correct, you'll receive points. You'll also receive more points based on the speed that you submit your response. At the end of the game, we'll see a podium and we'll see who our top 3 winners are. And I'm seeing some folks enter the game. Love all of these anonymous usernames. Gotta love the Kahoot song, Kahoot music. It sure does, Josette. I'm gonna give folks another 30 seconds to sign on and join our game before we get started. All right, y'all, we're gonna get started. Okay, our first question. How many states are required to provide information on preventing, recognizing, and responding to dating and sexual violence? You can go ahead and see the choices there and use your phone or computer to select your response. Oh, 20 answers in. All right, looks like we got, most folks got it, okay. Oh, I said that wrong. Okay, Glad Rooster, I see you. Next question, how many states require school districts to involve parents in sex education, HIV education, or both? Let's see. Who got it? The scoreboard change, we're about to see. Okay, Dr. Pigeon, moving on up. Next, how many states are required to include information on abstinence when sex education is taught? Most put 39. That is correct. 39 states and DC require provision on information on abstinence. Good job, y'all. Let's see the scoreboard. I can't really rush Kahoot to show us, but we'll see how it goes when we get there. Okay, y'all, it's heating up. How many states mandate sex education and or HIV education? Most put 38. That's the right answer. Well, 5 put at 38. I'm gonna get reading the scoreboard right, y'all. Dr. Pigeon, you came back, okay? It is. How many states are required to include information on the negative outcomes of sex when sex education is taught? Y'all are fast. The correct answer is 17. 2 folks got that right. I did it. I read this correctly. 17 is way too low, Manny. Proud Wallaby, heating up. That's a great name. Our next question, how many states are required to include an inclusive/diverse view when sex education is taught? Yep, 10 it is, and most folks got that. Oof is right because that's such a low number. Yeah. Okay, how many states are required to include information on contraception when sex education is taught? Music's really heating up. The correct answer is 20. Witty Mouse, you coming up the board too. How many states are required to provide information on asserting personal boundaries and refusing unwanted sexual advances? $24. Yeah, I would put lower too with the way that things have been going here. This one's a little bit higher, not necessarily the best, but you know, we getting somewhere. How many states require school districts to involve parents in sex education, HIV education, or both? Okay, the correct answer is 40. Sarah, same. Proud Wallaby sitting pretty up top. How many states are required to discuss the importance of consent to sexual activity to be covered? Correct answer is 11. Yeah. We have a lot more faith with the higher numbers that we put. Podium coming up, we got Witty Mouse at 3rd. Glad Rooster coming up, number 2. What's that, silver? There it is. And Proud Wallaby, sitting pretty with the gold. I love the hats. Great job, y'all. We all learned something new and sad, but new. Glad you enjoyed it, Manny. Okay, Proud Wallaby, thanks for unveiling. Okay, y'all. Thank you so much for playing with us, and congratulations to our winners. That was just a quick preview of some of the information that we're going to be getting into. So now we're going to segue over to our panelists for our discussion portion. As a reminder, please submit your questions via the anonymous Google form in the chat box. So during the game, and I'll be going over all the stats that we learned, and it'll queue up our questions. So one of the first stats is that only 25 states, or 50% of the US, mandate both sex education and HIV education. Josette, I'll start with you. What are some reasons HIV is excluded from health education curriculums?
Yeah, I think that a big reason is just stigma. There's still like a heavy stigma on HIV/AIDS, particularly coming out of like the HIV/AIDS crisis of the 80s. It's seen as like a gay disease, and that like you like did something wrong to get it, when in actuality it's a medical issue, much like COVID is, much like getting an abortion is. And so it's often excluded because you know, lawmakers and parents and lots of other people might think that, oh, my kid doesn't need to know that, they don't have to worry about it, when in actuality like it's something that can affect an array of people. You can get HIV from birth, from sharing needles, from sexual activity, and however you get it, it's not your fault. You should just like know what you need to do to take care of yourself and to protect others. So I think a big reason is stigma.
Thanks so much, Josette. And that's so important too, and just the ways that it negatively impacts when we're not talking about it, and how it continues to allow the stigma to thrive. You mentioned in your response, you know, that the stigma is that it's a gay disease, really heavy on the like quotes, because that's obviously incorrect. How would you respond to someone who says only gay men can get HIV?
Oh, it's such a good question. I think that I would say that with trying to lead with kindness, it is not just a disease for gay men. And even if gay men can get it, it doesn't mean that they've done something wrong, or that like they're, and I'm putting this in quotes again, that they're dirty, or that like there's something wrong with them. Like anybody can get HIV and AIDS. It's transmitted in an array of ways. And the reason that gay men are often stigmatized is because they were the community that came forward first when the first cases came through, much like with monkeypox. And then if you even think about with COVID and looking at the way that the Asian community was heavily impacted by COVID coming out, people like as a larger society will often blame the first people who come out and like report something or like are experiencing something, when in actuality it's not that person's fault. They didn't make the disease, it just exists. Like, we're just people and diseases exist, and yeah, anybody can get it, anybody can spread it, and that's why you need to protect yourself. And that's why young people need information, and adult people too need information on how to protect themselves and others.
Thank you so much, Josette. Moving on to the next stat that we saw during our game. 35 states allow parents the option to remove children from health education instruction. I do realize that actually wasn't part of the game, but now I'm introducing it. 35 states allow parents to remove their child from the health education instruction. Maddie, I'll turn over to you. How can a young person receive sex and HIV education in the event that their parental figure opts them out from receiving that class or course?
Sure. So hi, everybody. Really happy to be here talking with you all today. First, I'm going to really quickly repeat that disclaimer that Patricia so kindly gave at the beginning. My comments are my comments. They're meant to be informative. They're not intended as legal advice. Any opinions are my own. That out of the way, Patricia, your question. So how do laws involve parents and guardians in sex education provided to young people? As Patricia just shared, a majority of states actually do require parental or the involvement of an adult in a young person's life. What form does that take? Most states are opt-out states. So if a parent or guardian wants their child to be excused or removed from sexual health education that's provided in a school, they actually have to take some action, usually submit a request in writing to the district, to the principal, before their kid will, or their young person will be excused from the education. A small minority of states are let's see if I get this right. It's the opposite. They're opt-in states. So the default is that the young person does not receive sexual health education unless their parent affirmatively, their parent or guardian says, yes, my young person, I approve of their participation in this education. So I just want to point that out because it reflects an interesting tension, or it's a policy behind these laws. There is this balance of we want, or there's a, how should I put this? It's an attempt to balance parental or guardian involvement in sexual health education, and also the right of young people to have access to sexual health education. So I fear I've strayed from the question, which is in the event a parent or guardian opts their young person out of sexual health education, what are other ways that young people may get that education or get access to relevant information? I may be jumping ahead a little bit here, Patricia, but I'll just kind of preview one of our other topics, which is that most states give young people rights to consent to certain healthcare services independently, and so they can get healthcare information related to sex and sexuality, contraception, mental health services. They can get some of that information directly from a healthcare provider. Now, that's not to say there may not be some access issues there, but I'll pause there. But that's one way young people can get health information if they are opted out by a parent from education in a school setting.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And I know you mentioned some rights that young people have when it comes to trying to access that information, maybe going through their general practitioner or pediatrician. Are there any other ways that minors might be able to get that information outside of that?
So I'll elaborate on that just a little bit. So a lot of what I think Josette and Mav and I are trying with our comments today to talk about the national picture, right? Because I know we have folks who are here from all different states, but when it comes to sex education mandates, when it comes to the rights of young people to access healthcare independently, it's state by state. Each state gets to decide. They're going to dictate what rights young people have and the involvement of their parents and so forth. So I practice in Washington. If you joined early, you got to hear our Pride and Joy Macklemore, also from Washington. So I practice in Washington, which I will use as an example. Washington does allow, or the default is that parents or guardians consent to healthcare for their young people until minors reach age of 18. But there are a number of exceptions. So mental health services, I mentioned, substance use services, STD testing and treatment, contraceptive services, abortion. There are exceptions that allow people under 18 to access those services independently. With the right to consent independently often comes the right to confidentiality. So what does that mean? If you're getting treatment, advice from a provider related to one of those things, you can expect that treatment to remain confidential. So anyways, I just wanted to put a little more color on that. I mentioned, having those rights doesn't mean that access is always easy or possible for young people. I will say, one way that access can be more, or that young people can have better access, is if there are school-based health centers right in their school, right? So do you have independent providers who are right there? Do they have the ability to provide contraceptive services? Those are things that are going to depend, again, on what's going on in your community. So I've done a lot of talking on this. I want to see if maybe Josette or Mav have other ideas about how young people can get information when they're opted out.
I'll just do a quick plug, at least for New York City. I know a few resources. I'm based in New York City. So there's Call and Lord, which is a queer-centered, youth-focused, resource, health resource. Health resource, we'll call it that. But you can also get medical support. There's support for trans folks. There's support for anyone who's experiencing HIV/AIDS. The center, very good, Jay. My next example, which is an amazing resource as well. And both of those also have, so they're both health resources and they can be accessed online, but also you can get support in person. The center also gives wonderful internship opportunities and such. So I recommend. The only other thing I'll mention is that in New York City, anybody over the age of 15 can get free Plan B, free condoms, free lots of free other resources, and at least free or low cost birth control and other things through NYC 311. We'll send around resources after the panel, but just noting those things if you ever want to learn more.
Thank you so much, Josette and Maddie, for highlighting that and highlighting those resources. I'm going to move us on to our next stat that we saw within our game. This one we did see, I do remember. So more states are required to teach abstinence, 29 states, over contraception, which we saw were 20 states. How can we give young people the tools they need to make healthy decisions about engaging in sexual activity when messages such as abstinence only until marriage are being practiced and given in sex education?
So at least for me, the way I see this is it can be incredibly difficult to particularly for parents to like talk to their kids, especially when they're like, they're getting an education in school, like it'll be fine. It's not always fine. As we see, there's lots of like, there's a varying array of different laws, and even young people in a particular state could get different education school to school and even classroom to classroom. And so the thing I would say is that the best way to start, whether you're talking to a young person who is your child or talking to a young person as like a professional, like a teacher or somebody, or a health education volunteer for PHE, is first talking about consent from a super young age. I think a lot of times we see consent as like a conversation about sex, but it can actually be, it's about being a person. So like you can talk to like a 5-year-old about, hey, if you don't want this person to hug you, like you have a right to say no. It's your body and you have the right to say no there, or say yes. And I think taking that conversation further as that person grows up, and ensuring that it's clear that like having sex doesn't make you a bad person. Having sex doesn't mean you're going to, like, I'm putting again in quotes, to die, or that you're going to hell if you went to Catholic school like me. And that like there's an array of resources you can have. I shared some of them here, but we also have Self-See, which PHE has created, which has incredible resources for young people. We're obviously going into schools and doing that. But I think, just what I would say is that like start when people are young and show that like talking about consent and talking about relationships is not a burden or wrong, and that when they get older, like it's okay to talk about sex. It's totally normal. And if you're not comfortable talking about it, there's resources online. And I know Mav will get into online stuff soon.
Thank you, Josette. Yes, and thank you for calling out Self-See and dropping that link in the chat. Self-See is our own our resource that we've created, and there's a whole category. And we'll see even on the mobile app, young people will come and ask questions on like how to have conversations and how to talk about it, and we provide those resources to them. Maddie, can you share a little bit more about how we can be inclusive to young people who do want to practice abstinence? Because it's not that one is better than the other. Folks, we just want to make sure folks have the choice of knowing the different options out there.
Sure. So if you start looking into kind of what's the state of affairs across the country in sex education mandates, you'll see, which we're going to give you some awesome resources. There are some really, really fabulous resources on this topic. But you'll see references to comprehensive sexual health education, or some combination of those words. The key word is comprehensive. So that's going to mean different things in the context of the different states. But one way it is used is to describe laws that require that young people, students, be given information about abstinence in combination with contraception, in combination with information about STDs, and that there is an effort to provide all information a young person might need to make a choice that is right for them, and that information is provided without judgment and with attention to medical accuracy. Now, just because a law says that certain information must be included in sexual health education, there's, of course, as Josette was getting at in their earlier comments, that's not to guarantee the quality of how that information is delivered, and there's, you're going to have some huge variation. But again, when we just look at kind of what do these mandates say, that is one distinction. There are some mandates that say you must include information about abstinence, but you cannot teach it in isolation. So that's one way to be inclusive of all young people who may not know what they want. They need the information.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And I know you touched upon this in your response when we talked about the previous stat. Can you tell us some ways in which young people who maybe want access to contraception, how they can get access to that information?
Yes, so healthcare providers can give them access to that information, including if those folks are available to them in a school-based health center. That's one way. And then again, in states where it is mandated, so for example, in Washington, there is a mandate that the information provided as part of the sex education program include information on contraception. So again, state by state, if you're not in one of those states, then these other resources that we're talking about become really important.
Thanks, Maddie, for reiterating that. Gonna go ahead and move us on to our next stat. So y'all, we saw that 17 states require the inclusion of information on the negative outcomes of teen sex and pregnancy. Josette, discussing negative outcomes around sex can create an atmosphere of fear for young people who choose to engage in sexual activity. What are some ways parental figures can engage in a healthy conversation around teen sex and pregnancy?
Yeah, it's funny because when I hear that stat, I'm like, oh, well, they should learn the negative effects. But also, like, I think focusing on the negative is also like kind of problematic, because I think a lot of sex ed right now is like fear tactics, because it's like, you can't have sex, you're going to get pregnant and you're going to die, to quote Mean Girls. And it's like, that's not how that works. Like, having sex can be, if you choose to have like it can be a normal part of your life if you choose to have sex, or if you don't choose to have sex. Both of those are perfectly fine. And I think there's this like focus on like preventing pregnancy, particularly as coming out of like the late 2000s, 2010s. And this focus on like, you're going to get STIs, like all of this stuff is really bad. And it's like, one, lots of STIs and STDs are treatable. And even if they aren't, there's ways to treat them. Two, even if what I would say is like, I would rather parents talk to young people now about sex and like how they can, about consent, about relationships, about everything they need to know, like protection. Do it now, because it's very possible that young person's going to have sex, and I would rather them have the information now than have nothing and then be completely lost. They need a community around them, they need support. And even if parents aren't necessarily comfortable talking about, what happens if you get pregnant, what are your options, like what happens if you get an STI or an STD or HIV or AIDS, like I understand those conversations can get difficult, which is why you use the resources we share to start that conversation. And like I said earlier, talk about consent and talk about the ways in which like young people can like advocate for themselves. If you become a resource for either your child or someone you're teaching, for example, they'll come to you when something's wrong and you can work on it. So I think just like avoiding fear tactics is a huge thing, I would say.
Thank you. As you were answering that, the first half when you talked about the late 2000s and early 2010s, like really getting that message out there and talking about teen sex and pregnancy, I thought of Teen Mom on MTV and like the purpose of that show and what they were trying to do out there. Yes, judo. Judo is also a big one. You mentioned, you actually gave an example of this in your response of like, don't have sex and you'll die. Considered sex shaming. And we know that can come up a lot for young people who do decide to engage in sexual activity. How can young people identify what sex shaming looks like? And what are some ways to overcome shame around sex for young people?
That's a great question. What I would say for me is like, there's actually like a pretty wide array of what sex shaming can look like. I think it can come from either a very like conservative mindset of like, if you have sex, you're going to die or you're going to hell, or things I heard in Catholic school. It can also be like, oh, you're not having sex, that's weird. And in both cases, that's shaming that person. I think often in these conversations, we leave out folks who decide not to have sex or who don't want to have sex. And that can be shame too. There's like a huge stigma around it. I think part of identifying it is having these kinds of conversations and feeling comfortable enough to do it, which takes time. And I know being a young person can be really hard, particularly going to high school and learning things about yourself and all of that. But also like taking time to think about like, if you hear something like that, or you either said to you or to somebody else, like, how does that make you feel? And if it makes you feel bad, like identify why. And then in terms of overcoming it, I think it's partially learning to not listen to what other people are saying, which is a very hard thing to do. And I'm still trying to do it at 27. So I'm not going to give that as a flat advice. The other thing I would say is that like you have full control over what you do with your body. No one else, however they're talking to you, can change that. So you have the right to say, I'm going to have sex or I'm not going to have sex. And nothing anyone else says matters in that moment except what you want and what the other person or people you're having sex with want as well. So that's just what I would say.
You better preach. Thank you so much for that. And yes, that was just all of it was amazing. And so as we talked about sex shaming, y'all, and Josette gave us some really great examples, we're actually going to dive into an activity to help us dive deeper into what sex shaming looks like. So Gabby is sharing her screen right now. We're going to do a Mentimeter. So if you can click on the link in the chat that's being dropped in right now by Jolena, you'll be taken to our Mentimeter where you can submit your responses to our prompt here. You can also go to the Mentimeter website, similar that you did with Kahoot, and type in the code on your phone if that's easier. That information is at the very tip top right there, right above right there where the cursor is. Thank you. So go ahead, either access using the link in the chat box or using the one on your phone if you'd like, or going however you would like, and you can go ahead and just submit your response. Once you submit, it'll appear on the screen and we'll see what folks say who have experienced sex shaming messages. Seeing some really great ones come in the chat. And by chat, I mean the Mentimeter. I'm seeing lesbian sex is not real sex. If you have sex, you'll get pregnant. Sex is dangerous. You shouldn't be interested in sex, so why should we even talk about it? If you have sex, you'll go to hell. If you get an STI, you're dirty. Josette mentioned that test as well. It's being a messaging that was around premarital sex equals going to hell. Using birth control pills is dangerous and a risk to your health. Oof, yes, Josette. Sex will create a soul tie. Yes, you shouldn't be worried about that at your age. Or sex is a sin. Sex is painful. You can't have sex until you're 30. Someone put not necessarily shaming, but being told I had to be careful not to get pregnant and I would ruin my life if I got pregnant. Having sex definitely puts all of the onus on AFAB folks. Having sex at a young age will ruin your life. Yeah. I know there is one I heard. Oh, there's more. You'll get an STD forever. That's a scare tactic. If it's not penetration sex, it's not real sex. Audrey put, couldn't think of any specific examples, but there was a lot of slut shaming. Yes, a lot of slut shaming. I know one I heard from folks is it's not even like, because the messaging can come from even just like activities, maybe not penetrative sex, but even I remember hearing people talk about, oh, was told if I masturbate, I'll go blind. And I know that Big Mouth kind of talks a little bit about that too in some of their earlier episodes. Want to create space for our panelists. What are some reactions coming up for you as you see some of the things that were put into the Mentimeter?
Definitely getting flashbacks of that Catholic school trauma as well with Josette, right? We've heard so many of these, right? Like, especially the biggest one is if you have sex, you're going to die. And just hearing that, from the beginning, it's already like puts your mindset into such a question, right? Like, what am I doing? I'm scared now.
Yeah, I think I put in the chat, it kind of just reminds me of health class. And yeah, I think it speaks to like the fear tactics I mentioned of like, there's this like ongoing like conversation around like don't have sex or else X will happen. And it's like, we should actually just be talking about it like, you might have sex, here's what you can do to protect yourself. And it just makes me sad that like, I haven't been in high school in a minute and these things are still happening, right? And so it makes me grateful that places like PG exist, but I also wish that like states would just like, I don't know, have like medically accurate and inclusive information from the start,
Couple quick comments. One, because we've had a couple references to Catholic school, which I'm a proud product of. But when we talk about sex education mandates, keep in mind that a lot of them only apply to public schools. So that's just something to be aware of on this topic. And so it becomes all the more important that students who are in other schools have other avenues for getting accurate and comprehensive information. Just a reaction to kind of all of these is they're not informative. Now, I'm not saying they're accurate or not accurate. Some of them, are maybe accurate. They're not particularly informative, and they don't invite discussion. So with the person that you are saying this to, or the person receiving this, it doesn't invite any reaction or discussion. It in fact shuts down conversation, is I think what ties a lot of these together, which is unfortunate if a goal of health education is to involve the young people that we want to be receiving this information.
Maddie, that's such a great point that a lot of these statements are said to shut down the conversation and to not have any question or follow-up happening. And also such a great call out about the mandates really only applying to public schools. Us talking about this conversation reminds me of when I was learning about the process that our team went through to create Self-See, both the web app and the mobile app. And our team brought together young people from all over the country virtually, and they learned from each other within the space, like the difference in their sexual education. Lisa Walker, who's our VP of Digital Impact, will always talk about how like, they'll be like, wait, you learned that in California? I didn't learn that in like South Carolina, or you learned that in New York? I didn't learn that in Florida. And they like that actually infuriated them because they were like, why are we not getting the same information? How are you able to learn this, but I didn't learn that, and vice versa? So young people, when they find out those differences, like it really does impact and like it shows just how much gatekeeping is happening around sex education.
Totally.
Thanks so much for folks who entered things into the Mentimeter. I'll take us back into our discussion. So we're gonna go and start talking about the gaps in health education. So one stat is that 19 states require inclusion of information on condoms or contraception when HIV education is taught. Again, we got 50 states, 19 of them require that inclusion. Josette, can you talk a little bit more about that gap?
Yeah, I think this speaks to sort of something I talked about earlier of like the issue of just like removing like HIV/AIDS education and just like any contraceptive education from sex ed. It just means that young people aren't going to have safe sex. Like at the end of the day, the assumption that young people aren't having sex is an incorrect one. I'm not saying everybody does. Totally fine. I didn't have sex when I was in high school. That's totally normal. But if the assumption that they're not going to is going to lead to them having higher health risks, right? Like you can get pregnant, you can get an STI. Those things don't mean, and also, sorry, my cat's here, she also cares very deeply about sex ed. Those things don't mean that, there's something wrong with you, or that there's something wrong with you forever, or they're always going to be the case, because there's things like abortion and Plan B and medicine and lots of wonderful things in the medical field. But not offering these things to young people means they're not going to have what they need at the end of the day.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep talking about self-seek because I work on self-seek for folks who don't know that. But that reminds me of, there was a post that came in our sex and relationships community where a young person was asking if like they wanted to have sex, and they were asking if a location that they mentioned, it was a pretty public location, and they're like, do you think we can get away with having sex in this public public location? And I'm just thinking about them bringing that question to self-see. It's probably because they didn't feel comfortable doing it in their home, or maybe didn't have conversations about it. And our mentors were amazing and really guided them away from engaging in any activity in such a public place, kind of highlighting the very serious repercussions of what could happen and like other people finding them. But that's what happens when we're not having these open and honest conversations. People are going to go through different ways and different avenues to engage. Like they're still going to have sex. We just might not be able to like provide the appropriate resources they need. Okay, so another gap. Of the 50, 10 states require inclusive content with regard to sexual orientation. Gisette, would you like to share a little bit more on this gap?
Yeah, and I also, like, if other panelists have thoughts too, I'll open it up to them as well. But what I will say is, it makes me really sad because I'm queer, I'm non-binary, I'm trans, and I was very closeted in high school. And I remember just feeling like, oh, we don't talk about anything that's related to me. So clearly something is wrong with me. Like I remember thinking that. And it's the reason I do this work today, because there wasn't anything wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with queer youth today. You're like incredible and amazing, and you deserve to have like honest and beautiful like relationships, whether that's sexual or like romantic. And the thing I would say is like I advocate so heavily for queer-centered sex education because queer people exist, they have always existed, and they will continue to exist, even though there's conservatives who are trying to basically ban being transgender in the United States, which is going to disproportionately affect like trans people of color the most, right? So, and folks like myself, but my experience is obviously going to be different from those of like other marginalized backgrounds. And so I just think very deeply about like 10 out of 50 is not enough. It should be 50. And for the folks who are not getting that education, it's not their fault just because they live in a like quote a red state or a state that does not include that information. They didn't choose that. They deserve that information too. And it's why like I'm so incredibly passionate and care very deeply.
I'll also add real quick that I think there's also a misconception that, you know, when we're trying to highlight why, you know, gender, sexuality, and identities, queer identities, why that education is important here, people think of it as like a separate clause here, or it's like a separate thing here, right? But queer education is inclusive in itself, right? Like we're the whole point of it is to bring about a more inclusive environment. So the gap, especially with respect to sexual orientation, is that it's not as inclusive enough, right? And I share the same sentiments with Josette. You know, it's so heartbreaking, it's kind of too, because you know, if you don't have this, you don't even have not even just the education, but just the exposure to the possibility or just the understanding of how you may identify. It's really sad, yeah.
Thank you, Josette and Maverick. Another gap, the last gap that we'll talk about in this segment, is that 11, again, I'm gonna reiterate, we all know there's 50 states. Of those 50, 11 require the importance of consent to sexual activity to be covered. I'm gonna open it up to all of our panelists. Just any thoughts or any things that you wanna add to that gap and how it might be harming our young people.
One thing I'll throw out that I read recently that I found sad and interesting is that a problem with abstinence emphasis, and when the emphasis in sex education is abstinence and there's not a more comprehensive discussion happening, that assumes that all young people have a choice to be abstinent or not. And as we all know, that is not the case. And so, I mean, there's horribly high rates of sexual harassment and abuse happening for young people, especially young people in certain communities. And so by focusing the conversation there and only there, that is shaming, it's exclusive, you know, all the kind of things we've been talking about. I just wanted to put that out there, and then if that, in my mind, also relates to this question of how are we talking to young people about consent. And one interesting thing in some laws, some states that are kind of on the more comprehensive side is there are mandates that start pretty early in school education. So, you know, when in Washington, for example, there are mandates that I forget exactly when they start, but it's, you know, it's elementary school, right? But of course, it's age appropriate information. It's not necessarily, hey, let's kind of get to the far end of the spectrum when kids are 6, although certainly people were concerned about that when the bill was introduced. It's, what does it mean to have autonomy in your body, and when it comes to people touching you, that sort of thing. So, few thoughts.
I'll just throw in really quickly. I think jumping off what Maddie was saying, that like not everybody has a choice, and not everybody is told that they even have a choice, right? It's like one of those things where it's I think consent is often seen as like a one-time thing. You either say yes or you say no, and then you move on. But in actuality, it's like an ongoing conversation between anybody who's experiencing something related to sex, or not even related to sex, by the way. But you can, I had a participant who spoke to me in my research who mentioned that like they initially said yes to having sex with a partner and then rescinded that consent, and that wasn't honored. And they talked a lot about like how that they felt like, well, I said yes, so obviously like nothing was wrong. And it's like they learned later that like no, like that wasn't okay, and you should be able to take away consent, and so should your partners, and can your partners at any time. And that's why like talking and communication is so important. So I'll just like mention that at the outset. I'm also interested to see too, like Mav, I know you do a lot of work with like revenge porn, and like thinking about consent there. I wonder if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, when we're talking about consent, you know, we're still thinking about, especially when we're talking about mandates too, right? And what legislators think we need to focus on with consent. But as you know, technology evolves, as we are more on the digital space, right? We're using technology. Everyone's got a cell phone, right? The idea of consent is also has to evolve with that as well, right? How does consent look like if you're receiving someone's nudes, right? Like, have you consented to that? Are you willing to accept that nude, right? Are you willing to send that nude? Have you received consent of, you know, being able to send that? And so a lot of times, you know, like consent itself is such a conversation that needs to keep going, like keep evolving, right? And so when Josiah, you mentioned, you know, revenge porn laws, right? And just for everyone in the room to understand, right? Revenge porn is that idea that, and it's the unfortunate situation where a partner, someone has, you've shared an intimate image or a video with someone that you trust, or an intimate partner, and they've violated that trust by either threatening to or actually disseminating or sharing that intimate image without your consent, right? And so that concept and the idea of revenge porn has gained so much traction, especially in the online world, right? Like, just think about different porn sites, right? There's whole dedicated sections to just revenge porn videos, right? And it's something that's a huge gap that, I mean, right now we're still just talking about 11 states out of the 50, right? Are those 11 states even considering, you know, the implications of that consent has on the broader online community?
Thanks, Josette. Thanks, Mav. Such really great important points. And again, just emphasizing, right, like consent's not a forever thing. And just because you consented to something in the beginning, as Maverick, as you mentioned, around revenge porn, I mean, like, just because you consented to a photo once doesn't mean it remains the entire time or entire relationship. And these are the nuances that are being missed when we're not having these conversations with young people. We did have a question come in. What advice would you give queer young people today as they witness the mandates on their education, on what they do and don't have access to, and even their identities? I'll drop it in the chat.
I think it's such a complicated question, I think, because I think, I don't know, part of me is like, this is disheartening and it's okay to be upset about it. Like sometimes we don't necessarily have the answer to it right away. And I think a lot of people will push for like, vote and get someone in office to not do, and it's like, dude, sometimes that just feels like step after step after step, and like we don't actually get anything done. The thing I will say is that queer people as a whole owe the rights we do have to trans women of color, who were like the people who started like the movements and who were so both trans women of color and lots of other queer people were the people who made, it was like Stonewall, right? It's like thinking about like raids on queerness back in the day and like how that led to like activism and later on like law changes. So what I would say is that like it feels particularly bad right now because there's so much conversation around it, and that's not to say it's not bad. Like I don't want to minimize the fact that like this sucks to be super real and people are going to be negatively affected by it, but we fought before and we will continue to fight it. And there's like such beautiful and like there's just such beautiful solidarity in the queer community. And I would just say, like, find those circles and do what you can for the small communities you are a part of, so that can have a larger effect on like what's happening now. I will not tell you necessarily to like, yes, we should vote, ? I'm really iffy on like if that actually does anything, but we have power as people to make change in our communities on a small scale that will later on have an effect in a large way. And yeah, that's just what I would say, is that like it's a really shitty time to be queer right now. It has been shitty. It will continue to be shitty. And sorry to use crass language during a presentation, but I have no other way to say it. But we still have each other and we'll still fight. And yeah, we have each other. And I think that's just like utterly beautiful, even though it sucks.
Yeah, that was amazing, Josette. I'm just going to add, you know, in whatever area, you know, you're interested in whatever area you're in right now, right? All of them have, like, all of these areas that we're all in, you know, like Maddie and I are lawyers. So we see it every day, right? Like laws changing, and we have to see that and learn that and implement that, and then advocate for that too. In any space that you do have the capacity and capability to advocate, do it, right? It may seem like it's such a small thing, but it had like, and I'll speak from personal experience too. When I was in law school, I had a chance to participate in a legal clinic where we were able to provide just like a memorandum to the New York City Council when they were considering updating the sexual assault laws that are in New York City. And this really stemmed from the, I can't remember the exact case, but it was from a young person who was in Colombia who was a victim of sexual assault. And I think she had this amazing, you know, stance of where she was carrying around her mattress. Yeah, some people will remember that. Like, so New York City Council held like a, what is it called? A informational session. You know, the legal word for that, which I should know, but you know, like, and we had an opportunity to provide our opinions and understanding of, how the law should advance in order to protect us as young people, right? Us as, potential victims of sexual assault, because this can happen to anyone. And even though it didn't seem like, we were small, we were like one out of maybe 60 different participants that provided testimony and provided, that memorandum. But it all makes a difference and it all makes an impact, so whatever that form looks like for you, and you're comfortable doing it, do it.
Mav, that was such a good anecdote, and because you mentioned it, I just want to give a quick clarification to something I said earlier. I think I implied that sexual assault is more prevalent in some communities versus others, and actually, last time I checked, it's an issue that crosses all lines, unfortunately. So it's an issue for all of us.
Thanks all. And before I move us on, I'll give another side of advice to the question that came through is, as has been stressed and iterated throughout this conversation, is that while these mandates are coming into place and they're impacting schools and what's being taught in schools, there are so many resources in areas and online resources that young people can get access to this information. And my advice is more kind of like, be cautious of where you are getting that information from. The internet allows anyone to be an expert in anything. And so just when you are taking matters into your own hands, as you should, and wanting to learn more about your health, your body, and what feels good and right for you, just be mindful of where you're getting that information from. Again, gonna plug Self-See. All of our resources are vetted both by young people in both our team, but also know what the source is coming from. And sometimes as you look for information or even advice and suggestions, there's something about people writing things on the internet, and I think about tweets, they can be so forceful. They're just like, you should do this. And I'm like, okay, random user 37 from Alaska that I don't know, sure, I'll do it. But be mindful, if it doesn't feel good to you, you don't have to do it. And always just look for different places and areas to get that information and compare. So just wanted to call that out. Okay, so I'm gonna move us into our last topic, which is sexual activity in the digital space, which we've touched on a little bit more, but we'll go into a little further detail. So the pandemic has forced, and I kind of just mentioned it right there, and when I gave my own advice, is that it's forced this mode of education to be in a digital landscape. I mean, young people were virtual, folks who were able to be virtual, who had the resources to be virtual, they were virtual for about 2 years. How might this benefit and or hinder young people from learning about sex education in a digital environment? Maverick, I'll pass it on over to you.
Yeah, sure. So talk about gap, right? We were so forced just recently, we were all forced to live in this world where online education was the primary source of education, right? There was no meeting other people because that was legally just not allowed, or that was, all different states had and cities had their own requirements, and we were not meeting each other. And these things, as we've seen, it can definitely happen. So when we talk about implementing, like I mentioned before too, implementing technology is always kind of like a double-edged sword, right? You have on one side this amazing platform and technology that can enhance access to people, right? We saw a lot of people be able to, actually attend most of their classes, because in a traditional setting, you miss the class if you're not in school, or if you can't get to school, right? Or if you can't get to the physical location, and things happen, like commuting. I hate commuting too. So, it becomes a problem there too. The other thing is, the connection that people have through technology. You're able to connect with people from everywhere and anywhere, right? So the amount of people connecting from different communities, different societies, different geographic locations, it's astronomical, right? And at the same time, we also have to recognize that technology is a product. Technology is also subject to those who have the ownership of it, right? The internet is free and also, sporadic. And so when we think about and then when we're talking about connection and the information that we seek, just repeating that, you know, being mindful of what exactly is out there, what am I consuming when it comes to that information. All of these things have been considered when it comes to education now, because of the pandemic. And so educators, I think, now have had to force themselves to create like pretty much brand new curriculums, right? When it comes to being online. How do I teach, I don't know, physics over a Zoom class, right? Like I have to show all of this, something that I want, people to physically do or see, like how do I update that curriculum? So, the benefit of, being in the digital landscape is the access, is the ability for so many people to get that same education, with a lot of the previous barriers that we had not being so barrier-like. But the hindrance of being in a digital environment is all the unknowns that we have, right? And all of the issues that come up when educators have to update their curriculums to even think about how do I, teach this one thing. And so when it comes to sex education, how are educators thinking about updating their curriculums where they're recognizing technology could be, well, we're not even, getting into just the sex education, how it relates to technology and then being in the digital space, but just abstinence, contraception, right? Healthy relationships. How does that even look like in a digital landscape? How do I teach that in a digital landscape? Just the regular teachings, right? But one of that main gap there that we have to recognize too is how are we going, as we update our curriculums to teach in a digital environment, are we also teaching how to be in that digital environment, right?
Thanks so much, Maverick. Keeping us on the same topic about the digital environment, I'm going to combine two questions into one. So one, we've talked about this a little bit, but what does online sexual activity look like for young people? And what are some ways that young people can protect themselves when utilizing online modes for sexual activity and practice data privacy and security?
Yeah, I'll take this because it's my thing. When it comes to sexual activity online, right? I think before we talk about like what those examples look like, sending nudes, sending information to each other, intimate images, intimate videos, FaceTiming, and going through sexual activity on that spectrum. But what's really interesting and what we're seeing, what you see now, and young people are teaching us, right, is how we're evolving in the way that we conduct, in the way that we engage in sexual activity, because we're in a digital landscape, right? There's an opportunity that young people have to, because we're connected online, how does sexual activity, like what actually feels good to me since I have this space between us, right? This digital space. What turns me on? What feels good to me? What are some things that I actually enjoy talking about or doing online? And then at the same time, how does the digital landscape, how does interacting in the digital world lead us to developing those intimate partnerships together, or intimate relationships IRL, right? But when we do engage online, right, there's always a chance that the dangers lurking, I guess. I think of I'm also a cybersecurity attorney, so I deal with hackers and cyber criminals a lot. So every time I think of bad actors online, I'm always thinking about the guy in the hoodie and in the typing on his laptop away. But the reality is that these people exist as well, right? So what are some things that we can do to protect ourselves? I don't know if anyone's heard But two-step verification is cool now, right? So Google is pushing two-step verification. You had like Bretman Rock doing ads on TikTok and things like that. It's cool now because it's also important to do so. So like two-step verification is what? Being able to verify being able, when you log into, we all are logging into everything. We have so many different accounts, right? We have so many different spaces and platforms that we're on. So when we're logging in, we're adding an extra layer of verification to make sure so that the platform knows that it's us that's logging in and not anybody else, right? And so you have that extra layer of protection to make sure that nobody else can just hack in or just get into your platform and act as you with just a username and password. And so things, and then you know, a lot of times when people say change your password regularly, update your passwords once in a while, right? It's mainly it's because it's the ability to take that information is just so easy, right? So being able to take these small things and understand and learn what data privacy looks like, you know, what security looks like, especially as young people who are the most prevalent online, it helps to you know, engage in the digital landscape with a lot more peace of mind, right? And then just to be mindful of the fact that you never know who if you're interacting with someone that you don't know, that you haven't in person met, or you're not engaging in, you've never met this person, you should always be cautious with that, right? Being able, if you don't know this person, if you never met this person, you've never FaceTimed this person, but even if you have, you know, if there's also not a way to really confirm that, you know, in-person connection and understand that person, you always have to be mindful of what type of information you share. And that's, you know, across the board, whether it's here or whether it's in person or it's online. And then the last thing I'll share about when it comes to especially intimate images sharing, being mindful of how you share those images and videos, right? When you include markers of yourself, so like, you know, you have a mole that's right here, that's indicative of you, right? Like, and if someone sees that picture, they'll know it's you. Or if you have a noticeable tattoo, that's also a marker. You know, be mindful of those things when you're sharing those intimate images, especially if you don't have that established trust with the person you're sharing with. Stop here.
Thanks so much, Maverick. That's all such important information and things to keep in mind, especially as we think about like technology evolving and AI becoming bigger and deep fakes and like what people can do with that. I know you mentioned like knowing a lot about revenge porn, and while we're about to head more into our Q&A section, would love if you can share some resources, and we'll send it out to folks who are in attendance on what laws protect minors who are victims of non-consensual pornography. Just want to make sure that we get that info out to people. And as we round out, you know, I would love to pass it on over to Gisette just to close us out and tell us how can folks who are joining us today help us extend our reach to more young people in need of tools and resources, and the work that we do with sex education here at Peer Health Exchange?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've spoken about today relates directly back to the work we do at PHE. At PHE, we have relationship-centered and medically accurate information that's shared with young folks, both in high school and middle school. Now we're in some middle schools, which is really cool. We have them taught by near-peer fellows and also peer-to-peer, so folks in similar age to them, which I think is amazing. And then in addition, we also have Self-See, which Patricia has talked about so beautifully, which I think is such an incredible tool for young people to get information online that's accurate and get advice, like Patricia mentioned, the person earlier who was asking about something they were attempting to do, and get advice from people who know well. And so those are just two ways that PHE is doing this work, and ways you can support us. There's so many. I think coming to this event is one of them. donating, telling folks about PHE and the work we do, coming to even more events. We have some in-person events coming up in late March in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. And I think the last thing I'll just note is just keep sharing accurate information and encouraging both young folks and adults to advocate for themselves. And I think that's all we can ask.
Thank you so much, Josette. Thank you, Maverick. Thank you, Maddie. Thank you all so much for sharing your expertise with us. In some of our final minutes, I want to make sure that we have time for folks who are in the audience to ask us any questions they may have. So at this time, I know we're going to be dropping the link. It's already there. Thank you, Jolena. Please use the Google form to ask any questions that you might have, and we'll direct them to our panelists. And Gabby just dropped the link to our some of our in-person events that Josette mentioned, the Cheers to 20 Years in celebration of PHE's anniversary. As we wait to see some questions pop into the chat as folks fill them out into the Google form. I also want to just give this time, Maverick, Maddie, Josette, if there's anything else that y'all wanted to quickly and like reiterate or emphasize on while we have the time and space.
I think a big thing probably, and this relates to both the work that Mav and Maddie do, is just like learning your state's guidelines for what young people can advocate for themselves, whether that's online or in person, and ways that you can get information. A lot of times that's either on like a main health website for your state, or I've shared some for New York, Maddie shared some for Washington. Those should be readily available, and if not, just keep an eye out for the resources that Gabby will send after the fact, which should have even more options for you.
Yeah, and I'll just say one of those resources that I know Josette and I have both used for getting educated on some of these issues, the Guttmacher Institute. I say it how you like. I don't know how it's supposed to be said, but one thing that they do is they have a state legislation tracker. So if you're interested in what's happening, not only what is the law in your state, but what's proposed, I will not promise it will make you happy to see what's going on, but if you want to be informed about that, they have a great legislation tracker tool. Thanks, Gabby. Oh, Jolena. Thanks, Jolena.
Thanks, y'all. Such amazing and great information. Looks like y'all really hit it with all the knowledge and information. We don't have any questions coming in, and that's just a testament to all of the amazing information that you gave us. So y'all, we won't make you stare at us for that long. We'll end early. We do have a survey. Please, Jolena just dropped it in the link. Please take the survey to let us know your thoughts on how this event went. Also, you can direct any of your questions within it that didn't get to be answered, and we can also send that out with our resources. Jolena's dropping some really incredible links in the chat. Again, I just want to say a huge thank you to our amazing panelists, Josette, Maverick, and Maddie. Once more, thank you all so much. I also want to give a huge thank you and shout out to Gabby and Jolena, who are doing a lot of work behind the scenes. This would not be possible without them. So please also show them some love in the chat and some reactions on the screen. And lastly, y'all, thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to moderate today's conversation. I struggled with my words a little bit, but we got there. You saw me figure out cahoots. We got there. I appreciate the patience. If you would like to support our work, please consider making a donation. No gift is too big or too small. Again, you can use the QR code right here on the left-hand side of the screen, or you can go text PHE to the phone number there. And I know Jelena has dropped in our donation page link into the chat several times. Again, thank you so much for spending this time with us, y'all, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.